Okay, we are now live streaming, and we can begin when you're ready.
So we're 9:01. So we'll call to order. Individual roll call still, or?
Yes. Yep, we are still operating hybrid, so we do have to do a roll call to start. So I will start in the order of the agenda. If you can confirm your attendance when I call your name. Shauna Janeway sitting in for Dave Sanders.
Here.
Marlene Fonseca.
Here.
Jose Barba sitting in for Chad Boggio.
Here.
Esteban Lizardo.
Here.
Tony Royster.
Here.
Matthew Rudnick.
Here.
Paul Gerard sitting in for Matt Zabo.
Present.
And Petty Santos sitting in for Holly Walcott.
Here.
That is 8 members present and a quorum. At this time, anybody who'd like to make a public comment who's attending virtually, if you could press *6 on your phone, or *9, excuse me, on your phone to put yourself in the speaker queue. For those who are attending in person, if you could come to the table with your speaker card. And while we're waiting for public speakers, just a quick reminder to everybody who's attending both in person, either a JLMBC member or a member of the public, if you could speak directly into the mic to be able to have everybody hear you within this room. The sound does not carry well, and also hear very well through the virtual meeting. Seeing no speakers present.
Good reminder about the mic. Okay, so we need to review the minutes for February 2nd and March 2nd of this year. Do we need to do them separately, or can we do them together?
They could be done together. So motion to doing them together.
Okay. Motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Second.
And just to confirm the motions for both of them, correct? Then we'll go in the same order of the agenda as we did before. So Shauna, your vote.
Aye.
Shauna votes aye. Marlene, your vote.
Aye.
Marlene votes aye. Jose, your vote.
Aye.
Jose votes aye. Esteban, your vote.
Aye.
Esteban votes aye. Tony, your vote.
Aye.
Tony votes aye. Matt, your vote.
Aye.
Matt votes aye. Paul, your vote.
Aye.
Paul votes aye. And Petty, your vote.
Aye.
Petty votes aye. It's unanimous. The motion passes.
Moving on to item number 4, committee report 2227. Local insurance plan options for 2025.
Yep, I will start this one off. So this is an option that we're bringing forward, or a discussion that we're bringing forward, to really ask the JLMBC, how do you want to proceed? So in discussing our medical plan options, as the JLMBC might remember, we did issue a number of RFPs for this past year, and we were successfully able to select 2 vendors through our RFP that we issued in 2022 for services in 2023 and 2024. We issued a 2-year contract for just those years. On the decision, or the attempt at that point, to decide if we wanted to move forward and extend that service contract, or we wanted to go back out to bid for RFP again. At our last meeting, we did confirm the 2024 renewal for our medical plans at a 10.4% increase for Kaiser and a 9.9% increase for Anthem. So discussing on how we decide to move forward is really a big topic for us to discuss, if we want to continue those contracts or if we want to go back out to bid. So the items to consider for us in that concept is much larger than just the functional process of doing one or the other. We're presenting or asking the JLMBC, do you want to have this conversation in a group forum like this at the JLMBC meeting, or would you like to send it over to the ad hoc, or create an ad hoc to start the conversation and bring down a more narrow scoped recommendation to the JLMBC to consider? There's a few items in this report that I wanted to go over. We can skip past the background to the timeline. So on page 3, whether we wanted to do an extension of the current contract or an RFP, the actual timeline to do either is rather similar. So for us to start, if we went the RFP route and we issued a brand new RFP, we would want to target that release for around December or January. So in about 5 to 6 months from now. If we wanted to continue our contract extension, we could do that around the same time. The target goal that we need to meet, that we cannot move, is adopting the plan for 2025. And that needs to happen by May of 2024. So working backwards, we have a little bit of lead time to be able to figure out which option we need to go with, or which option we want to go with. And there's a lot of items that we should consider or that the JLMBC may want to consider in determining which one might be best. Some options we can do through a contract, some options we can do through an RFP, and some options we can do through both. In discussing with Keenan, some of these items to consider might be changes towards our overall plan itself. So we might want to look at changes towards the plan on how people are enrolled, how long they're enrolled, what the factors are for them to enroll, just overall population. Some committee members that have been here for a while might remember we did a dependent audit back in 2013 that did remove a lot of members that were not eligible. So that might be something to consider. That might not be something that we could do within that time frame. I would say most definitely it's not something we could do within that time frame, but that's the kind of item or that kind of topic for us to potentially dive into deeper and look at overall enrollment and who's enrolled into the plan for population size. We may want to look at benefit plan coverage changes. The plan design has been the same plan design for decades. It has not changed. So maybe it's time to consider something additional or something different within the plan design. Maybe looking further, and I know the JLMBC has looked at this previously, but looking into other options such as a high deductible health plan, looking into other options as far as how the deductible and how the copays are set. But when we had issued our RFPs for the past couple of years, we did not ask for those plan design changes. We did not ask for anything different. We'd asked for repeating and matching our current plan design and keeping everything the same. So this might be an item that we'd want to dive deeper into and consider maybe asking for something different. That would definitely have to be through an RFP. We wouldn't be able to do that through a contract extension. We may want to look at fiscal changes. It is a tough topic to discuss, but the city has established a very fixed rate of how subsidy is identified. It is set in the ad code, it is set in MOUs. So maybe there's a conversation to have on how the subsidy is determined instead of it being fixed and set without change and without any other conversation. There's other fiscal potential challenges or other things we could just consider or look at as far as how the city is paying for its benefits. And then there's other items that could be considered as well outside of those physical changes or changes towards the member experience or anything else. Those could be changes that the JLMBC may want us to look at as far as looking further into why the rates are the rates, why the underwriting is the way it is. Other things that we could look at into the main cost drivers for why we're seeing the results that we've been seeing year after year in the price increases. Those particular changes wouldn't have to necessarily go through RFP or they could go through just the contract extension. But it would be something we want to consider and discuss further or try to think about discussing before we pursue either option. Actually, with all those items, there's lots to consider. Actually, it's a very large spectrum of information for us to look at. And that's why it's a big question now on how you want us to proceed. So we could have that conversation go to an ad hoc committee. There is a plan design ad hoc committee that was created quite a while ago. That is option B in section D. The existing ad hoc plan design subcommittee was created to look at overall plan design. It has not met since 2020. It last met to make a change to our cash in lieu program as far as the requirements for people to be able to get cash in lieu. It has not met since then. There are a number of items that it was still pending to discuss. Some of the topics that we just talked about may not be within line with that ad hoc plan design committee because it was identified specifically towards plan design. So there may be a desire of the JLMBC to create a brand new subcommittee strictly towards this concept of medical plans to be able to cover everything that we've talked about and then some to look into this deeper. Or the committee may decide not to have any subcommittee look at everything and for us to talk about this as a group. It would be a lot of discussion. It would be discussion that we'd have to have over multiple meetings. But we could go that route and have myself, my team, and Keenan come together with an overall report and recommendation of what kind of options and access we would say to move forward with either an RFP extension or a contract extension. RFP issuing or contract extension. So I did throw everything all really quickly at once. And that was on purpose to try to summarize where we're at and what this objective is. And I'm happy to dig deeper into any concept of what I just said or answer any questions that you have outside of that with this particular report.
have any questions from the committee?
So
The main-
what is
oh, sorry.
your preference?
So I would say a subcommittee avenue would be more appropriate. As an ad hoc subcommittee, it is a working group of 5 people or less, according to our bylaws, to be able to work on this. But it would be a decent amount of work. So it would be the timing that someone would have or need to have to be able to commit to meeting on a regular basis. We can definitely frame it as shortening the physical amount of discussion time as much as possible and having all of the legwork and the review and all the other information coming from staff and from consultants. But it would be a substantial amount of work. It seems to me it would be easier route to go that avenue, to have a subcommittee review this and talk about this and bring the full recommendation to the board from that group. But ultimately that comes to a choice of, is there enough people on this committee that would want to partake in the subcommittee and feel comfortable enough only getting the recommendation as the information moves forward, as well as any other questions that you have.
If it's the May date that you have here, is that because it takes from like May to October to queue everything up so that people will start making those selections in October?
That's actually for our plan approval process. So but yeah, that is the underlying reason. We do have to have open enrollment within a certain time period at the end of the year for effective next year. We do have to have the plan adopted by city council by around this time, around July, for that to physically happen. So that's the cadence that we've been on.
Okay, so we would have to be, if we go with a new, whether we go extension or otherwise, you're saying we need to be in council at this time next year.
Correct. With whatever our plan looks like for 2025.
Completely finished with whatever process.
Correct. And arguably in these options, we aren't necessarily saying that this is going to be a complete, everything's decided and done with and we're ready to implement for 2025. And some of these items to consider, it may take a couple of years for us to be able to go down that route. Namely, if we're trying to look at big changes towards structure or plan or anything else. Some of those changes very well could happen in a couple months and be able to be done by 2025.
But not necessarily plan design. Like plan design will be a part of if we went the RFP way, plan design would be addressed in the RFP.
Correct. We would ask, yeah, if we went the RFP route, but that's the only way we can do plan design changes is through the RFP route. And if we went the RFP route, we can ask what we haven't asked in past years, which is give us your options. Tell us to how much you want to price for this, or specifically what kind of plan changes we want to have, and how they can be priced and how they can be functioned. And we would be able to do that for implementation in 2025 if we could settle on those changes.
Quick question, are any of these items more critical than the others, so we can put priority in?
It's really hard to say because it's hard to, we're essentially kind of making some guesses at what we think could have, at least at this point, of what we think could have an impact towards cost. We would, I believe so. I think that from the, in the committee's welcome to be able to argue a different route, but from the conversations we've been having, from what we've been seeing historically, I think the overall objective is to try to rein in or make it cost a little bit more sustainable.
We have an idea which of these items will have more significant impact on costs, stability.
It's too difficult to say, I think, at this stage. That is definitely something, though, that we'd be discussing further with the subcommittee, or we discuss further with our consultants in any type of report that comes back. But it is too difficult to. What I can definitely say is there's not one thing that we've identified in the conversations I've had so far that we can say for sure this is going to be something that's going to move that needle down.
As it relates to the fiscal changes and all of the possibilities of how the city could move about with fiscal changes, is that directly related to, you know, the RFP process or even an extension of the contract? Like the contracts, however we come about a contract through an extension or through an RFP process, is separate from the fiscal structure of how we you know, it,
So
Yeah,
I think I know what you're saying.
yeah.
Yes. So they're essentially two different components. So the city taking an action to change what it wants to do fiscally of how much it's going to be able to pay if it sets a cap at a certain dollar amount, that we can do completely on our own. That is separate from either of these actions. However, in underwriting, and Keenan can attest to this, I'm pretty sure, in underwriting, sometimes that is a factor. And that plays in heavily towards how premiums are identified or for the proposal from either carrier.
but if we are already in contract and we already like have a set, whatever the contract is, because we extended it, so we have a contract, or because we selected a vendor, you know, through another process, and the civil, those things are locked in, no changes can be made to that, no matter what we're doing here on the other side with fiscal structure.
It depends on the contract language that we have. Technically, we only awarded a 2-year contract. So our option to extend doesn't necessarily, there's bargaining room, there's wiggle room within there. So there is ability for us to be able to say, this change is happening, and what does it mean? But not plan design. Not plan design because that was part of the RFP that we originally issued. We said we only wanted these items. We didn't ask for anything else.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, well, I don't know how anybody else feels, but there's a lot of conversation that I'm not sure we're having right now. And I think that, you know, even things that, you know, we might want to talk about, but don't even know we want to talk about until we sort of delve into this. I like the idea of a subcommittee. And I'm not, and if the subcommittee decides that, well, we want to bring back to the JLMBC that we just extend, then maybe it doesn't take lots and lots of meetings. But we need to have, you know, a conversation where you can just kind of, you know, after everybody sort of really takes in this information, to have the conversation, you know what I mean? It's kind of hard to have it in this forum unless everybody's ready to have it, which it doesn't, I'm not getting that.
I support this.
I agree. If we do one, it seems to me, looking at the two subcommittee options, that one is more constrained in its effectiveness than the other, and creating a new one. It's like to me, so perhaps the new subcommittee might be better for this.
The subcommittee would have to have recommendations by November.
So it depends on what the recommendation is, to be completely frank. But the recommendation would need to really go forward, depending if it's a request to release an RFP, or a recommendation to release an RFP, or a recommendation to extend a contract. We have a couple months. I think on the table on page 3, we identified 4 months for designing an RFP. We don't need to have that much time to design the RFP, depending on what the ultimate request is, what the ultimate kind of goal is in the RFP itself. So it would really probably be July, August, September as the preferred time period that we're trying to come to some sort of recommendation.
Entertaining motion. Whenever you're ready.
I have one question. Do we anticipate a fee going out to bid again, so get us a better price based on what's in the market? Same thing, if we don't even change the design at all.
That's really hard to say. So I will say we got a number of proposals back 2 years ago when we had, well, 3 years ago when we had gone out to bid before. That did not happen again when we went out to bid the following year. And we only got our incumbents plus one additional company. It is hard to judge that we would have a larger spectrum of individuals bidding because things are constantly changing. But I think I can say without compromise that from what we did see a few years ago, there was interest potentially in other ancillary products of providing options or being able to bid on a slightly different model. There was some some questions towards that. There was some intent of interest at that time. So we would only be able to find out if that is still interest or there's still kind of a response if we issued an RFP again.
So does the consultant have any information, any other agencies doing similar practices and seeing some change or reduction? Because my major concern is we do all the design or whatever to make sure we're not impacting the services to our employees. And if you really look at, if you modify anything, either someone's gonna pay more or someone's gonna do service.
So we do have Keenan online virtually, and we also have Keenan in the room. I'm not sure if either Keenan wants to speak to that question. It looks like Borden's going to come up.
Hi, Borden Dartmouth Keenan. If you recall, when we were going over the health insurance renewals for the next year, we had a small discussion about the way rates are even funded. So there's one aspect of changing plan designs. We push that to us aside. If you're living renewal to renewal, I made the comment, it's like living paycheck to paycheck. Not the best environment. Most people like to have a little bit of reserve in the bank and so forth. Entities are starting to head into that direction more and more, where they have reserves that they're sitting on outside of just paying premium and so forth. That allows them then to look at more multi-year strategies to keep renewals more constant than when you're going renewal to renewal. It's basically you're subject to the ebbs and flows of the renewal, increases, decreases, or whatever. And this is one strategy there that we need to look at is, should we be accumulating a margin so that we can access more strategies? In addition to that, there's also the discussion of the way we currently contract with the insurance carriers. Should we look where possible to still be fully insured? We're not talking about self-funding or anything like that. Fully insured, but change from a non-participating to a participating contract, meaning if there is premium left over that the carrier didn't need, but that actually returns to the city as opposed to staying with the carrier. That's another concept. That and those are the two that I discussed. There's more that we'll probably discuss, and that's why I supported ad hoc committee, so that we can kind of talk about financial arrangements and possibilities and come back with some recommendations that would suit the city, hopefully.
I'd like to move that the JLMBC create a new ad hoc medical plan subcommittee for development of a recommendation on medical plan coverage for plan year 2025.
Second.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and take a vote. And we'll go into the same order. So Shauna, your vote.
Aye.
Shauna votes aye. Marlene, your vote.
Aye.
Marlene votes aye. Jose, your vote. Jose votes aye. Esteban, your vote.
Aye.
Esteban votes aye. Dana, your vote.
Aye.
Dana votes aye. Tony, your vote.
Aye.
Tony votes aye. Matt, your vote.
Aye.
Matt votes aye. Paul, your vote.
Aye.
Paul votes aye. And Petty, your vote.
Aye.
Petty votes aye. We will reach out after this meeting for people who want to be on the subcommittee. It is a minimum of 2 members and a maximum of 5.
Move on to action item 5, report 28, proposed amendment to bylaws.
Okay, I'll be taking this one as well. So this is actually a continued item from last meeting. I think most of the JLMBC members will remember that we did propose an amendment to the bylaws last meeting to be able to address a potential hole within our bylaws. Our bylaws as currently written, which are attached in attachment A, allow for a change towards a member's representation on the committee if the member identifies that they no longer want to be a member. So the member has to provide a statement or provide a direction saying that they no longer want to be a member. The other option is if they're incapacitated and unable to be able to physically attend. There is not an option. And in that case, there's still a requirement for documentation to show that they're incapacitated or unable to by physical ability, attend. There is not an option to be able to remove a member in any other fashion. So the recommendation at that time was to make a change to the bylaws in section 5, as identified, that if there's ever a situation where a individual is absent or not attending, to be able to put a structure in place to be able to change the member seat. The language that's presented in section C of section 5.6 within the bylaws, which is page 9 of the attachment, is a draft language. It's not language that the JLMBC needs to take. It is language that can be changed at this meeting if there is a desire to move forward. And in this concept itself, the JLMBC has a few different options. So in the recommendation, we have identified to send this to another ad hoc if you wanted to be able to discuss bylaw changes. The JLMBC may remember that we created a ad hoc for the bylaws when we changed them in 2021. And actually that ad hoc was around for a little while. We did a massive overload towards the bylaws at that time. But that ad hoc was disbanded when the bylaws were adopted in 2021. So it no longer exists. So the recommendation is either to create a new governance ad hoc to look at this, or to go ahead and make a change now if you wanted to move forward with a change. Alternatively, that you could vote not to do anything.
Questions or?
I think I do. I'm trying to make sure that I understand. So all of C is new.
Correct.
And so C says that if both people, the primary member as well as the alternate, miss 3 consecutive meetings or 5 in a year, then we can remove them both.
Well, at that point, you have the option to call the item. So in the event that exactly what you said, that both the member and the alternate are absent consecutively 3 times or 5 years in a total year, and for reference, we're scheduled to have 12 regular meetings in a year. At that point, once that event happens, then at the JLMBC's decision, you can call for an action, or you can call for a consideration item to be able to then vote. So we would essentially agendize an consideration item that could be discussed, and then you could take an action on it if you wanted to change that member.
So, and we would be taking an action to call the seat vacant.
Essentially, yes.
Not to replace them yet, that's a different thing.
That is correct. Yeah, under the way the bylaws are written, depending if it's a labor member, depending it's a management member, there are certain ways of distinctly different ways of how a member is appointed or selected. Correct.
And no change to that.
Correct.
Okay.
That's not recommended at this time. I mean, technically, the JLMBC can make a change to the bylaws as a body, so you can make a change to anything as a document under a specific process. But that's not recommended at this time.
So understanding C, then C1 and C2 are a little confusing for me.
And that it can be completely rewritten, but that is was language that we had borrowed from another section that's not previously here. So technically C is a rewrite of something. So we could completely remove 1 and 2 if the desire of the committee is to move forward. But the intent of the language is exactly what we talked about, to be able to create a situation where if there is no one attending for a period of time, to be able to have the action where you can then make that seat vacant.
So, but what is the intent of C1 and C2? I
So
don't want to miss the intent if we should be having that.
So the intent was perhaps there is a situation where neither member showed up, but maybe the alternate member didn't show up because of whatever the situation is, and the alternate member wants to become the member. Or maybe the JLMBC wants to make the alternate member the member.
But could we not do that through the regular process?
Arguably, I think you could, right? Like
By default, right? They would be gone.
once you make the seat vacant, you could name anyone you like, and you could rename the same person or the alternate as a member. You could. There is no restriction necessarily in that aspect. From what I'm.
Sorry, Charles, I'm city attorney, if I can interrupt. For C1, it's a procedural matter where if the primary member is absent, then the special meeting that is called to seek the removal of the primary member, and then the alternate member that's been pre-selected prior would step in the shoes of the primary
Who
member.
also hasn't been here.
But the alternate is not required to be here. I mean, technically, the alternate is an alternate. The primary member is the member.
Mhm.
And then the alternate member is unavailable, or then they're not present. But the focus of quote unquote judgment is on the primary member.
Okay, so C1 and C2 are sort of a matter of law to say that if we're
It's
going to-
procedure.
Yeah, I get you. Although from a practical perspective, right, the only way we would be into C is because we've not also seen the alternate as well, right?
That is correct.
Practically
Yeah,
speaking,
yes.
but as a matter of format,
Right.
you don't remove the alternate, you remove the member.
Correct, procedurally.
Okay. And, okay, understood. Go ahead.
Well, it seems to me that 1 and 2 are separate from C, and that shouldn't be a subsection of C. Because 1 and 2 do not talk about vacating the seat entirely. They just talk about how to make the primary, the alternate the primary. So it seems to me that C, if C were just how to deal with primary and alternates, and then D is the proposed vacating a seat, because you're not vacating a seat when you're moving from a primary to an alternate. Mr. Gerard is here as the alternate for Mr. Sabo, and that's just procedural, what you do to make sure you have meetings. But it's my understanding that when, as you put it, when neither show up, at a certain point, the committee needs to have bodies to work. And so it makes sense that after a certain amount of time, you don't have to actually consult the people who are missing. You just say, they haven't been here, we're gonna call it vacant. And now the opportunity is to be entirely different than what we have. And that's why, to me, C is different than 1 and 2.
So if I can just clarify, C is the general, I would say, rubric in which this body is acting.
Right.
1 and 2, C1 and C2 goes into the specifics as to how this general concept of removing a vacant, removing a member
But if 1 and
is
2
to
are
be
considered,
executed.
if 1 and 2 are considered a subset of C, it creates confusion that Ms. Brown was talking about, because you don't need to have C in order to do 1 and 2. But you have C because you're missing both 1 and 2 for a considerable period of time.
So I think 1 is to be read in context of C. C1 is to be read in
Then
context
it
of
doesn't
C.
make sense. I agree with Ms. Brown.
Well, but I changed my mind after Charles kind of explained it. I mean, it's intuitively odd, but procedurally and legally, I get what he's saying. Because
You mean in the same way we could recognize Jeffrey Dahmer is saying to try him for murder? That it's odd in that way. It's legally correct. It's just sorry. It's an old example. I have to be a lawyer of how law can be legally correct and practically, insane. I'm sorry. For me, if you want me to vote on this, 1 and 2 have to be separate from C.
Well, you can vote no.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
So I feel like, and I don't know if you guys have, any input, but I think that C is so that we can remove a committee member. But the only person that's a committee member is the actual committee member,
Right.
not the alternate.
Right.
So I think that C1 and C2 speak to this person who is actually not a committee member and what could happen with them if we wanted, right?
Well, it is a shall, so I think it should not be a shall, because, I mean, it could be a case by case, right? The alternate may not have been getting the notifications, maybe the primary wasn't informing the alternate that they can't attend and that they should attend in their place. But you have as one that alternate shall serve as the primary voting member.
Well, I think we should point out, so
Can it be a may?
It's kind of
Section-
like what happens at the resignation. You just.
Correct.
What happens if somebody resigns.
exactly, this is procedurally copying section A of the same section. So
But would are we okay though, Charles, if we got rid of 1 and 2 and we just got rid of that person and started over? Is that sound to do that procedurally?
So if we were to play out the hypotheticals as written in C, if the primary member was removed at a special meeting, there is an alternate that's already been designated. And so the status of the alternate then becomes in question if that alternate can't serve as a primary member once the primary member is reserved. Again, the alternate is a contingent role. I mean, that role only is contingent upon the absence of the primary.
The difficult, sorry. No, that's okay. I was just saying, the difficult for me is that if the language in C that says can identify the seat as vacant makes sense to me. But so within the concept of a seat, there is a primary and an alternate. I don't, unless, for example, let's just say that Victor was the primary and I was the alternate. Unless Victor and I are going to have an argument about who gets to go to the meetings, which is not going to happen because we're occupying the same seat. I don't think you need the C language for that purpose. What you need the C language for is for a vacant seat. The seat encompasses a primary and an alternate. So that's why it doesn't make sense to have this process. You don't need a process to remove a primary and alternate. That's mostly the seat making a determination, hey, you should go to the meetings because I can't. I mean, so that's why I do think they should be separate. It's the difference between a seat, which includes as a subset a primary and an alternate, and within the subset, the primary and the alternate.
The bylaws actually specify that an alternate has standing. If not for Matt Zabo,
Right.
I would not exist.
Exactly.
So when you remove Matt Zabo, do
Right.
I continue, do I have the right to step in as the primary?
I think C1 addresses that concern.
Well, but then number 2 says in the event that the alternate becomes, number 1 says the alternate does become.
Mhm.
So there's no if then in number 2. You've already said that when we remove the primary,
Mhm.
the alternate does become. Why do we then go to say in the event that the alternate does become? The alternate is already.
well, and I'm not sure, Charles, if, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I think it might be leading back to section 2.1 of identifying how an alternate is selected and what their position is. I think that might be the small technicality.
Well, the alternate's name,
Who
right?
selects the alternate? Is it the
The
member?
It is the member.
The principal selects the
Correct.
alternate.
So if I'm gone and then a new person comes in, they don't have to keep my alternate.
That's true.
So.
That's correct. You are the one.
so
But
if
that
you're moving
language-
the member, then the alternate's not.
Again, the alternate establishes, becomes, or has relevance or standing upon the removal of the primary. So that once the primary is removed, their discretion as who becomes their alternate is again terminated. And so the alternate steps in the shoes, and then the alternate becomes the primary member. And then the respective laborer shall appoint the alternate voting member. So there's a step-by-step procedure in terms of how the relevance, how each step becomes relevant.
Because ultimately, the organization owns both seats, not the
Yeah,
primary
yeah.
member.
So if we're gonna add C, could we not revise C to say, any serving member of the committee can then identify the seat as vacant and call for a special meeting for the purpose of removing that member and the alternate
Or
from the
that,
seat?
or that seat, I agree.
Can we say both?
Yeah. they're both-
I would
And
so
then get
move
rid of
what
one
Ms.
and two?
Brown has moved,
So-
and including
But does that mean, that-
deleting 1 and 2.
but does that mean that you, does that mean that Mayuna no longer has a seat at the table?
Well, no, because I think that's a stay established somewhere else, no? That Luna has a seat
Yeah,
at the table.
technically, we're in the
Well-
2 unnamed categories.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, so,
But that's ultimately separate, right? Because if I understand it correctly, if we adopted C and took action on C, there's nothing preventing the committee from re-putting that organization back in.
Right. Or for example, the organization saying, fine, but we still want our seat, we just want to make sure we have somebody there.
that doesn't really cure the problem though, because if you've got 2 people from one organization who don't show, and they're the leaders of the organization, how are we to expect that magically somebody in the organization underneath the leader who has been derelict is all of a sudden going to show up?
And if they do, how do you know that that's the person that you want to show up for the organization? For instance, in the employee or in the management, it could be a chief MA. So say your chief MA is your alternate, and now your chief MA is the primary member. And then you can have an alternate under the chief MA. Now you don't even have the general manager as a member.
I think though that the way Ms. Brown identified, I would be willing to do second promotion to modify C to say in the second part, to make the language consistent. Identify seat as vacant and removing the seat. And then deleting 1 and 2. That does leave open the question, which I don't think we necessarily need to answer today, which is how does that organization retain the seat? I don't think we necessarily need to answer that question. Respectfully, I understand what you're saying. On our end, from the union side, for example, we had some miscommunication. Victor and I cleared that up because he's been the business manager and I've been the city rep for 3 years now, but I was not aware that this committee was in existence. Although I did learn at the last meeting because Paul sent me the email, which I appreciated. And then I was able to learn that, maybe I should have asked Victor 2 years ago, hey, what's happening with this committee? And then we probably wouldn't have had the issue come up. But so I would second, if Ms. Brown makes the motion, I would second it to just amend C to identify seat and seat as opposed to removing the member. So removing the seat and deleting 1 and 2. And again, we're not, if I understand the motion, we're not purporting to answer the larger question of how do you then fill that seat? Again, it seems to me that, we don't necessarily have to answer that question today.
Last question, is there any discomfort from the city attorney with that proposal, or you have any issues or concerns that we should consider?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of concerns being raised at the table here, and a lot of questions on how procedurally, again, when the bylaws were originally restated, certain ideas or contingencies were not addressed in the document itself. I mean, in terms of absences, vacancies, and et cetera. And so there wasn't a mechanism within the bylaws as restated before as to how to deal with those situations. I know the recommendation also asked for the creation of an ad hoc governance subcommittee. That's possibly a good idea. So all concerns can be raised, all contingencies can be raised or hypotheticals. And so the drafting can mirror or somehow incorporate those concerns.
Now you see what mess y'all got us into.
Did you actually?
I didn't.
Okay. I move for the creation of an ad hoc committee to address this issue further so that we can have ample time to develop a proposal that meets all the concerns.
Okay, are we ready for a vote then? So for the motion to create an ad hoc governance committee, we'll go in the same order as the agenda as we've done before. Shauna, your vote?
Aye.
Shauna votes aye. Marlene, your vote?
Aye.
Marlene votes aye. Jose, your vote?
Aye.
Jose votes aye. Esteban, your vote?
Aye.
Esteban votes aye. Dana, your vote?
Under protest. Aye.
Dana reluctantly votes aye.
Your turn.
Tony, your vote?
So noted.
Tony votes aye. Matt, your vote?
Aye.
Matt votes aye. Paul, your vote?
Aye.
Paul votes aye. And Petty, your vote?
I'm
Petty votes aye. And as with the prior item, the subcommittee is a minimum of 2, maximum of 5. We will reach out to all JLMBC members after this meeting to identify who wants to be on that subcommittee.
Can I ask a kind of point of order question? Are alternates also selected to be on subcommittees, or are they not? Are they?
They can
They're
serve,
not considered the first two, maybe?
they can serve the same way as you do on the full JLMBC. So it would be the member who's identified as a subcommittee member, and the alternate can step in.
I'm exhausted.
Moving on to informational item number 6, benefit provider presentation from standard.
And I think Keenan's going to be starting. So Melissa, if you're able to hear us, if you could unmute your phone by pressing *6.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, all right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to do a brief overview of the Standards 2022 programs and services. So next slide. And the standard has been with the city since 1998, providing life, short and long-term disability. Employees also can provide supplemental coverages, whether that be life, a buy-up to disability, or voluntary AD&D coverage. Current enrollment numbers below, so around 51% are in the supplemental life and 54% in that AD&D coverage. And only 19% of employees have purchased the buy-up disability coverage. We have seen a decline in enrollment since 2019. We do see this is aligned with sort of the attrition and change in staffing the city has had with the COVID pandemic and the separation incentive program. So new employees coming in, we're not seeing as much of new employees joining these programs. Next slide. And the next slide is just an overview of sort of those with the 2023 renewal that we worked with the standard on last summer. We saw some really good renewal rate decreases, and this is just an overview of those decreases that are effective this year and through the end of next year as well. So we have that this 3-year rate guarantee that we'll be moving forward with for the 2024 plan year. There's the option to extend for 2025. We are in sort of an RFP, so we're at the end of the normal contract, so we could either choose to extend or can go to RFP if that's decided. Outside of this, effective with this past year, we've rolled out that new on-site account specialist, Darren, who I believe is here with us today. And yeah, we're really excited to have that additional service offering for the city. Next slide. These are just planned program observations. We're looking at the top diagnosis by program over the 2022 and 2023 years. For 2023, this data is as of the end of April, so no long-term disability yet due to the elimination period. But seeing that, we've really dropped off the COVID pandemic, not seeing high claim counts that previously risen due to the pandemic with circulatory and respiratory claims. Those have subsided and we've gone to normal levels. So nothing too unusual in this current plan year to date yet. And then next, you'll be joined by Jennifer from the Standard, and that's Melissa King passing off to Jennifer Queen and Darren. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
It's nice to be here in person. It's been a while that we've been seeing everything on the screen, and it's good to be back at the city. My name is Jennifer Queen, and I am a national account consultant with the Standard. My role is to oversee the strategic relationship between Standard and the city. And I'm joined today by Darren Plotnick, who has been working on the city's account since 1998. was the original account manager, and this year moved into a new role dedicated specifically to the city. Next slide, please. So our agenda for today, the following slides cover a little bit of summary around plan design, history, and participation. And then we'll talk specifically about life claims and disability claim trends. So Melissa went over this a bit, but just to expand a bit more on the benefit offerings. The city provides a basic life and disability benefit. So the basic life benefit we've noted here is low compared to market. It's either 10,000 for full-time members or 5,000 for part-time members. We wanted to plug in just, you know, in the environment of being competitive and benefits, what we're seeing benchmarking that against public sector. We looked at Standard's book. Standard has a high amount of public sector business and in California. And so the benchmarking was relevant within Standard alone. And we're seeing about 75% of public sector clients offer more out of a basic benefit. There's certainly a generous voluntary program also available at the city. So I definitely want to point that out. I would say the maximum we see there is fairly high compared to market. But we did want to point out that the employer paid basic benefit is a little low comparatively.
How much lower?
50. So it's kind of, it depends on sector, overall income, what you're trying to look. So it can vary a little bit. 50,000 is a very common amount. We do offer it as employer paid. The reason is probably because of imputed income. Taxes don't come into play on employer paid benefits that are below $50,000. So I'd say 50,000 is very common. So is one-time annual earnings. We see there's, if you ever wanted to see specific information by sector, by region, we can supply that for you.
Thank you.
So as noted, employees can buy up coverage. So we have a supplemental life plan that you can purchase in 1 to 5 times annual earnings, up to 3 times your salary. And it has a max of 1 million, so covers quite a few earners out there. The life experience does fluctuate. So experience relates to performance of the plan and is absolutely expected to fluctuate. We did see a rise in life claims over the last couple of years. The respiratory claims absolutely went up during the pandemic, which is expected. We have seen it run a little bit high more recently. When we looked at the renewal, we typically with life experience look over the past 5 years because it's so volatile, and the previous years really were in place and allowed us to offer the reduction that we did. So it looks kind of alarming to see that 182% there for basic life. One thing that I'll point there is the volume is much, much lower than that supplemental life. So the supplemental life tends to run pretty well and the basic life not as well, but they balance out together. We're seeing it run at a 90% loss ratio. So typically a rough benchmark for loss ratio is about 80%. And what that is a ratio of claims to premium and cost to run the plan. So we want to see it come in around 80 to make up for the retention costs of the plan. So it's running a little bit hot the last couple of years, but we just renewed it and we need a lot more life experience to rate for the future. So we're not really concerned about this, just something to know. Overall, the disability plan has run very well. So the pandemic was interesting and I think will produce interesting actuarial results for a long time. Short-term disability results improved during that time. Short-term disability is really credible because of the amount of claims that come through. So we did offer a reduction because of what we saw during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So just a high-level look at claims and incidents. I would say this is really, really, common with what we've seen in the past in the city and public sector in general. So looking at life and accidental death and dismemberment insurance, the top diagnosis we're seeing for claims is cancer, circulatory, accidents and violence. That is the IBI code for that disability. And then for liability, so your claim dollars versus incidents is your claim count. We're seeing accidents and violence, cancer, and circulatory also. In disability, these trends are common throughout the years too, so no big surprises. Looking at newer data, highest incidence and liability continues to be with the airport and police departments. Skeletal conditions represent the majority of all disability claims. It's the #1 claim category for public sector. And this is all in line with benchmarking. Maternity is the second highest in incidence for STD, also very common. And accidents and violence for LTD. Compared to market, the mental claims I'd say are slightly high. We have a slide that narrows that down a little bit more for you. And then for LTD, violence claims are also slightly high. So I've condensed this slide a bit in the past. We used to go into more detail, but we have a lot of history. So I tried to simplify it and not have you read this much this year. Really focusing in on the last, I would say, 5 years or so. There's been a lot of change. A lot of this has come with what capability the city has been able to expand regarding its enrollment resources, things like that, and standard growing with capability as well. So we've added improved claim intake services. We've been automated some continuation notices for port and convert around the life insurance, and provided more electronic tools in general. There was a behavioral health resource center introduced in 2021 that provides a lot of resources to management, and also EOI notifications taken over at that time. So that means we get a data feed from you when someone is required to submit evidence of insurability. We take out that notification and take that off the city's plate. Again, the rate reductions negotiated for the 2023 renewal, we're pleased to pass those on. And then in 2023, we have two big changes. Darren is one, and we'll go into his role a little bit more in a second. And then the other one is around evidence of insurability. So I hope everyone knows what I mean by that term, but if not, it's essentially what is required for medical underwriting. So if someone is a late applicant or applying above a certain threshold, then we require they submit medical evidence to become insurable. It is industry-wide, somewhat confusing process for people. And we have a service this year going live that we're working with the city and Telethon to make it much more simple. So the service we're putting in place will put a data feed in place for us to exchange information. And then members, instead of getting a general application, them and their dependents will now receive personalized applications saying what amounts they have in force, what they're eligible to apply for. And then the standard will follow up with those members on when those applications need to come in and close it out. So it's a much more personalized experience for people. We also see enrollment numbers go up with it. So thinking that disability enrollment number is a little bit low, we hope we see change with that. And then we'll get into Darren's role here in a sec. So Darren, I am so pleased to work with Darren on this account. He's one of our, I think he is our longest standing account manager at Standard, and the city being near and dear, he ended up applying for the role when we added an on-site account specialist. So just a little bit about that role. This person is employed by the Standard, but 100% dedicated to the city, and really designed to not do so much account management activities, but take what was sitting on HR's plate off or provide further member assistance, kind of being able to look at Standard system, and also sitting or being able to represent the city provides us with more ability to help members and HR. So just a couple duties noted here that Darren's been covering. He's taken over life claim filing, so assisting members and beneficiaries. We also, for claim process with these employees, we get a lot of comments on it's helpful having a neutral party or someone who's not, representative of the policyholder, being able to talk through claim circumstances. Darren's working a lot with the city's payroll departments who work on the disability claim process, contributed information. So he's being a go-between in and out for us. And is there anything in particular you want to say? Anything you want to add? You're right here, and I'm talking about your role. So anyways, it's been a good addition. And we meet with the city HR team bi-weekly, so we're always willing to mold this role. It's definitely malleable, shapeable. So when more comes along for the city, we're willing to look at that, what more can we do? How can we fit in to assist? Any questions regarding that new role? All right. So the participation. So Keenan talked about this a little bit. I would say looking at life. So this graph shows year-over-year participation for the last 5. On the left is the life and AD&D participation, and on the right is short-term disability. On the left, the different colors show the different products and enrollment. So you can see your total population on the life graph in the blue bars. So total population, And then we're looking at the supplemental coverages in green and orange. I would say 50% enrollment, above 50% is pretty strong. I also think that's indicative of the base. The base is low, so you're going to see stronger enrollment when you have that. But solid enrollment there, people are purchasing and using the plan. The long-term disability, short-term disability is a little bit lower than we'd like to see. I'd say commonly 25% is the mark we have for disability enrollment. So it's a little bit lower. Standard did offer a one-time open enrollment. We can always revisit that. And essentially that would be for the buyout plan for late enrollees. It would be pre-X would still apply that. So we could always look at something like that. And again, the connected EOI process, just hoping, to bring clarity around that, make application processing much easier. Hopefully we'll see enrollment go up. So we'll watch that with that service being put in place.
Before you go ahead, you've got a lot of, and just being considerate of time.
Yes.
We had a lot of discussion earlier, so the rest of it, it gets into a lot of detailed charts. So was there anything that anybody particularly wanted to delve into, or any specific questions that anybody had?
I just have one simple question, and I think it's just my naivete from not being here very long. For the basic life, why is not everyone enrolled in basic life? Isn't it offered free by the city?
It
Basic
is.
life? So why wouldn't it be more like 100% of the employees?
Are you seeing the number counts look off to you there?
Well, it's showing like 90+%, but I'm just thinking, is there a group of employees that somehow either don't know it exists or aren't automatically enrolled in it, or is it 100% of employees enrolled in basic life?
I think so. The 100% on the graph is reflecting how the population has shifted over the years. So we're looking at total population that's insurable in the
I
blue
see.
bar.
I see.
Yeah, so I get where your eye was going there.
I see what you mean. Okay, good. Got it.
I had a quick question about the buyout disability. So you mentioned that enrollment's been lower.
Yes.
Is that just like trending consistent with the experience during the pandemic? Like the buyout disability requires like documentation provided by an employee. Is it like a medical history or any
Only if
eval?
you're late enrollee.
Only if you're late?
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing about the supplemental life versus the buyout disability is supplemental life has annual enrollment rules to where evidence isn't always required. But if you're covered for the base plan and you elect to go up to the supplemental disability plan without having a family status change, evidence is always required.
And so I guess I'm curious, is that evidence, is it pretty easy to provide that evidence? Does it require you going to see your doctor and get?
Initially, it's just a form
It's a-
with about 10 health questions, but as Jennifer mentioned, we also have connected EOI being rolled out, so right now what happens is the employees sign up through Keeping LA Well, and they make their elections, and then as Jennifer also mentioned, we have currently EOI notification, which sends them out a letter indicating evidence is required, but with connected EOI, if I'm going from the base disability plan to supplemental disability, I'm going to receive an evidence form that is pre-populated, that all I need to do is hit the questions, because what's happened in the past is sometimes when they elect coverage during October through Keeping LA Well, but they have till that following March 1st to submit the evidence form, the elections weren't always matching, and so there was some confusion. But it does require evidence of insurability be completed by the applicant, but it doesn't require their doctor fill out a form or anything like that.
So, thank you.
And a lot of times, I think with disability enrollment, it's insurance, so we work a lot with the HR department to provide education around it. I also think, long-term disability is definitely one of the most valuable benefits you can have. I mean, if you get disabled in your 20s, it can be till your 60s. So a lot of it is around education with employees and making sure they understand the value of it. When they're new, they can sign up for all of it. The city's plan design is also pretty solid on the buyout because it's benefits are taxable based on employer and employee contributions. Any piece that is paid for by an employee is not taxable at claim time. So, and it goes up to 66 2/3%, which is higher than market. And part of that being not taxable makes the buyout a very rich benefit. So it's a strong benefit the city's offered, and I do think education has a huge play in that. We're hoping the connected EOI process will simplify for evidence, but we're always happy to partner on education programs and things like that. Sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, so I'm looking at the disability claims, both short-term and long-term, and noticing the two departments with the highest claims, which is little, I don't know, unusual to me because these are all civilians, right? So why would those two departments be so much higher than the others? Because we don't have civilians, you know, in these departments jumping fences and chasing down people. or anything like that. LAWA and police.
Airport police, that's what's.
Are airports police civilians under these plans?
Correct.
They have,
Yeah.
they have.
How many airport police are there though?
My guess is it's related to the population.
Oh, is there that many?
It's
Is that-
substantial.
It's the number of employees.
Well, what about in this LAPD?
There's about 450 airport police officers.
Plus there's non-sworn, which is by folks who do a lot of the.
Security
like
officers.
Are these broken down by the types of claims? Like, are they
What slide are you looking at?
I'm looking at the disability claims. I mean, are they broken down by the types of claims they are?
So in this one, in this particular graph, it's just showing claims by department. There isn't, it's not talking about what type of claim. So what we see will be relative to the overall size of the population. So that could be part of it. You know, if there's a higher population, we're going to see a higher percentage of claims. We do also, from a risk perspective, there are certain, we do anticipate based on jobs, people have more risk. Or it even it relates back to underwriting to lifestyle too, and things like that. There's all sorts of things that go into it. Those are typically the things that are going to drive it.
Do you ever look at that and evaluate what the claims that are coming out of?
We do. So we watch everything. I'd say from what we see, the claims activity is as expected. One of the things is we do have a lot of data on the city year over year. It is very consistent. When we look to renewal, if we see any claims in particular that have, it matters most with long-term disability because long-term disability has reserves. So those reserves can add a lot to the pricing. So if we're seeing an unsettled claim that might have really high reserves, we'll start looking at those individually to see the circumstances of them as we go into renewal. It's been pretty consistent with the city. We haven't seen anything alarming. I would say looking at a city in general, those are the occupations and departments we'd expect to drive the highest cost. I'd say that that's in line, typically because of size insured, and then also just overall occupation, lifestyle, things like that. I'd say this is pretty common. But we do watch it. We really do going into renewal, and we look to, you know, we have discussions with underwriters about, you know, this reserve looks high, but this person might be coming up for a 2-year or an occupation change, or they might have a limitation that may be applied to the plan, or they might be on Social Security. So we watch those to see if reserves will come down. But we've been able to if anything with the city, hold in lower rates for the last several years. So the experience has looked pretty good. Does that answer your question, okay?
Somewhat.
Yeah. We can always provide like benchmarking data, kind of, you know, industry-wide on occupations or city to city. We certainly work with a ton of California public sector. So we could always provide that. My guess is this is going to be very consistent across cities. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Sorry. So I remember benefit presentation.
And this one is a request, a report back from our May meeting. We have Delta here and we also have Delta virtual.
Perfect. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. Appreciate it. My name is Michelle Bodie, Director of Account Services for the National Account segment at Delta. And I am joined by two of my colleagues on video. We've got Valerie Lane, our Vice President of National and Special Accounts at Delta, And then we've also got Kristen Warren, who many of you have met, your dedicated Delta Dental account manager. Oh, there you are. Okay, perfect. I'm looking at a different screen. Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kristen Warren to go ahead and get us started.
Thank you. And we thank you for selecting Delta to continue as your dental carrier for your members. We are here today to address network questions that came up at the last JLMBC meeting. And Paul, if you want to go to the agenda, we're going to just start with the state of the dental industry as it relates specifically to dentists and networks. We'll share our provider focus and what's going on in that realm. We're going to review network access and where Delta compares in the marketplace. And then we'll specifically look at City of LA's utilized providers and looking at both terms and ads in the last 12 months. We'll share our network strategy to ensure that we are maintaining a strong network and end with where we are in 2023 year to date in terms of our network growth. At any point, please feel free to stop us and ask questions, and I'll turn it over to Valerie Lane.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. All righty. Well, we wanted to start by talking a little bit about the industry because like every other industry in this country, the dental industry was impacted by the pandemic as well. And it really caused dentists to take a step back and evaluate their practices. You saw over the last couple of years a lot more retirements with dentists and a lot more offices that maybe closed or the dentists moved away or moved their practices. So that is all post-pandemic. The other thing that really impacted dental offices was the ability to staff their offices with hygienists and registered dental assistants. So during the pandemic, a lot of individuals who were practicing those two professions got out of that practice, and there became an almost immediate shortage, if you will, of registered dental assistants and hygienists. We've been working with some outside organizations to help fund retraining, if you will, in the industry to start to make more availability for those jobs. But that has impacted dental office ability to maintain the same hours or deliver the same level of services. We've seen dentists go insurance independent, meaning they've decided that they're just going to get out of the insurance industry or claims completely and just administer a cash office, if you will. And a lot of that comes with different types of models you've seen out there, concierge models, where they're offering members the ability to go in and pay a flat fee and they can have X services every year. So a lot of change in the industry, and we're absolutely aware of that. If you go to the next slide, we realize that with that change, we need to change as well. We need to pivot and make sure that we are meeting the providers' needs as we go forward, because that is a very important partnership to us. So provider partnerships is part of our strategic roadmap. It is high up on our priorities, if you will. One of the things that we are doing is to try to engage in and expand more digital capabilities for providers. So we understand that the provider offices are short-staffed now. They need to be more efficient. How can we help them to be more efficient, and how can we make it easier for them to interact with us? So we've rolled out a couple of new tools to providers. We have some extensive provider tools in place right now that allow providers to file claims with us and look up eligibility and do all those things while the member is in the chair, but we're expanding those tools to again facilitate that process. We streamlined our provider contracting process. So as we're adding new providers, which you'll hear about later, we want to make sure that we can get those providers on as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So we are looking at a 45-day turnaround time to add new providers into the network. We've simplified some of our other administrative processes. There's always an opportunity to make it easier to submit a claim, easier to follow up, et cetera. So So a lot of simplification has gone in there. The credentialing process with providers has been streamlined. And then we've done two things that I'm really excited about. The first is our Provider Advisory Council. So we now offer the providers a seat at the table, if you will. We understand what we think they might need in terms of how to get through this period of time, how to move forward more effectively. But the truth is they are the ones who know what they need. So we launched an advisory provider council this past month, and dentists and staff members, office managers, et cetera, come to the table and they talk about what they need, what they're seeing, what would make their lives better and easier, and how we can partner with them going forward. So very excited about the work that is being done there. And then finally, we have expanded our provider concierge model to really create a high touch model for providers. So our ambassadors now are out there and available to the provider offices, so they can call us with any type of question that they have that is not necessarily a claim related question, but it could be a process related question or an observation that they have continue to have a problem in a certain area. They have an advocate, they have an ambassador out there that they can talk to on a daily basis and get their questions answered quickly. Next slide. So yeah, as you can tell, provider is very important to us. That is really what key to our product, if you will, in the industry. We have always provided you one of the largest contracted networks in California, and that is true nationally as well. So we continue to be focused on continuing to grow those networks and make sure that we are delivering what we think is the value proposition that we bring to you today. You can see in the various counties that your members are utilizing, the 5 highest counties your members are utilizing in. You can see that we have anywhere from 77% to 83% of those dentists are contracted in our Premier network, and 64 to 72% of those are also contracted in our PPO network, which is the more highly discounted network. So we continue to look at these numbers and make a commitment to you to grow those numbers. If we go to the next slide, we always look at this and look at ourselves in comparison with other carriers in the industry as well to make sure that we're hitting the mark. This slide's a little bit misleading. The blue bars are actually should be the same length because they represent the dentists that the carriers that we overlap with the other 4 largest carriers in the state. So you can see the blue bars, we overlap there, and then the orange is where our network is larger. And again, that is our commitment to you, is to continue to grow that network and deliver the best access to your members. Next slide.
Wonderful. Thanks, Valerie. I
You're welcome.
wanted to dig into your group specific utilization a little bit. On the left-hand side, we're going to look at California as a whole. On the right-hand side, we're going to dig into top 2 utilized counties, which is LA County and Orange County. On the left-hand side in California, we are currently, your membership is currently utilizing 5,833 contracted providers. Of that total, we did see 119 total terminations in the most recent 12 months. 73 of those terminations were voluntary. Voluntary term reasons are a result of actions taken by the provider, such as closure of practice or financial reasons, for example. And then 46 were due to attrition or involuntary reasons. Attrition includes the provider being deceased or retired, or perhaps moving to a new location. Involuntary is a result of actions taken by Delta Dental, which are primarily licensing and contracting failures. The good news, and I do want to point this out, is we're actually adding providers at a much greater rate. As you can see there, in the most recent 12-month period, we've added 1,437 new providers in California. And of that number, 193 providers are currently being seen by City of LA members, which is great news. And then digging into it a little bit on the right-hand side, I won't read through every statistic, but in LA, your members are currently seeing 4,203 providers. Well, we did see 97 terminations. The good news is we did add 588 new providers in the county of LA, of which 134 of those providers are currently being utilized by your members, again, which is outstanding. Orange County, very similarly, your membership is utilizing just shy of 800 providers. We only saw 18 terms, yet we added 257 providers in Orange. The key here is we wanted to reassure the city that while there is going to be turnover, which is standard with any carrier, the good news is we're adding providers at a much greater rate, which is good news and reassurance for your membership. Perfect. I'd like to share with you today a few network strategy initiatives that we're working on and have deployed throughout the year. We have the imminent termination intervention process. And essentially what that means is anytime that we receive a provider termination notifying us that a provider is going to term our network, we automatically engage our provider relations team. They set up time to meet with the provider, talk through the reason why they're anticipating the term, to essentially see if we can retain that provider in our network. And the good news is we've actually had really good success there. So we've been really pleased with this. We also do target recruitment. We utilize data analytics to identify highly utilized out-of-network providers. So we're constantly combing the network just to ensure that we've got access for the city of LA and our entire member population. Valerie talked about our provider advisory council that we've had great success with. And then our annual market review. This is not anything new. This is something that we do on a regular basis throughout the year. We're constantly looking demographically by geographic region in each state to ensure that we don't have any gaps, to ensure that we're meeting our access requirements, and to ensure that the City of LA membership has adequate access to dentists. Network growth for 2023, just wanted to point out that we're growing, which is happy to see and report out. This is specific to 2023. On the left is illustrative of our PPO network. On the right is our Premier. It's illustrated of your 5 top most heavily utilized counties. As you can see in our PPO network, we have grown just in the first 5 months, LA County by 2.1%, Riverside 2.6%, Orange has remained consistent, and then San Bernardino 2.1%. And then on the right there, that network participation, what that illustrates is of the number of providers administering care, this is the percentage that are contracted in our PPO network. So as you can see there in Ventura, for example, 72.7% of the providers that are available are in our PPO network for you all to utilize. LA County 64.5. And then on the right side, our Premier network is even more heavily concentrated, and we're continuing to grow that network as well. As you can see there, LA County, we grew the Premier network by 1.5%. And we have 77.2% of all of the dentists contracted with us in our Premier network. So really just wanted to reassure the city that not only does your membership have adequate dental access, but we're not resting on that. We're continuing to grow the network and continuing to improve our technology and continuing to enhance and grow and nurture our relationships with our provider network. That is really all we had, but wanted to see if anybody had any questions.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Item number 8, community question 329 on the self-funded insurance.
Okay, so this one's also me. This is a response back also at the May meeting when we adopted the recommendation to continue Delta as a result of the RFP. There's also discussion about shifting over to a self-funded option with an administrative services only component with Delta as well as Vision. And there was request at that time for staff to come back with a report of what staff's position was in this concept. So that's what this report does. It's just an informational item identifying where we stand of what we understand with the concept and where we are still evaluating and looking at the risks, the potential risk, and what steps we would need to move forward. So just to kind of premise a little bit into this concept, and I think this should be a rather quick conversation. Currently, for medical, dental, and vision, we have purchased a fully insured product. So that means that we are just paying the premium. We're responsible to pay the premium, and the provider does everything else, which includes reviewing claims, processing those claims, resolving complaints resulting to service in those claims, also dealing with data security under the larger array of laws and regulations, but most namely HIPAA. It's our understanding that if we move to a self-insured product model, that some of that responsibility could shift to the city. There is definitely, as Keenan has identified, there is a option, or there is a preference necessarily where we would contract with the provider themselves to execute a contract where they're still doing a lot of the basic level of work. But it's our understanding that this concept of moving to a self-insured model would still identify the city as a covered entity for the purposes of that product. Right now, the city has a hybrid covered entity model. So it identifies certain divisions and certain divisions within certain departments as covered entities and needing to comply fully within the laws of a covered entity under HIPAA. That is attachment number A. So, attachment letter A is the city's current stance of which departments and which divisions are a covered entity. Under that requirement, it's our understanding from there's actually a city attorney that is in charge of really HIPAA compliance for the most part. She's not here today. But it's our understanding we would have to take certain measures, which include identifying a HIPAA officer who would go through training, go through the responsibilities and everything to make sure that they fully understand HIPAA backwards and forwards, and that our office is fully compliant with HIPAA. There would be requirements potentially for certain things to change, even though we might be outsourcing the work. So in this concept, it's also our understanding that even though we would be outsourcing the work that under a separate agreement with a provider, there could be situations where the city may still have to make a judgment or still may have to get involved. So there can be some specific claims where the city may need to tell the provider how to administer that claim or what the responsibility may be. There could be specific legal disputes that could come through that may position the city in a certain level of position based on that current or based on the based on the self-funded component. And then there's also a concern kind of in data itself. If we were to move to a self-funded, what we think is that level of identifying ourselves as a covered entity would still create a situation where we may have some level of exposure in transmitting data. We don't currently have the infrastructure to be able to transmit data through secure email. That would be something we'd have to look at. But there could be a potential exposure to data breach, potentially, that we would need to itemize, identify and minimize. It's all about risk, ultimately. Our position is not that this is a bad idea. It's not that it is too complicated to move forward. We just want to be able to move forward and discuss risk and look at all these avenues holistically and firmly to make sure that we're understanding exactly what we're getting into, exactly what we're going to be approaching, and making sure that we're taking the measures if we do decide to move forward as cleanly, as simply as possible, comprehensively at the beginning. We wouldn't want to move forward with a self-funded option and then have to scramble to put in some sort of measure in place, to change a contract language, to do something else after the fact. We want to make sure that we're covering all those bases before we went down that avenue. So that is the general premise of this whole report, is that I think we would be continuing, unless there's a specific request from the committee, we'd be continuing to evaluate and continue to review this concept of switching over to a self-funded plan, identifying what would be needed specifically, and then taking an action to move forward. What I can definitely say is it seems the minimum requirement in this conversation, at least from what we've talked about so far, would be to identify a HIPAA compliance officer so that we have the security and safety in place to ensure that we are able to perform that function and to move that function forward. That I believe kind of in our current structure, that would be adding a new position to our division. I don't think there's workload enough to have it. So that's still something that we're still investigating, still reviewing, still trying to understand fully, and making sure that we're moving forward very carefully.
When we look at it, we also do some type of financial analysis, determining if we, based on what we're doing, and we transition over to the self-funding, what is to done.
You mean as a report back? You want us to bring something physical?
When you're looking at selecting officers, I think we need to know exactly what's it going to cost us, because we go down this road, in the end, it's going to cost us more money than we thought we could save. So we need to know financially, and also risk and liability before.
Right. We can definitely work to bring something like that forward.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to Committee Report 2330 project and
Good morning, JLMBC members. I will be going over some of the highlights in the projects and activities report. First up on page 1, we have one informational item. This is a follow-up to the April 6th Anthem Grievance and Appeals presentation. Following the questions that were brought up during the meeting, Anthem has updated their presentation and revised some of the data, and that revised presentation is included in the report as it happened to be. Moving on over to the project updates. First, we have one update on the 2024 benefit year open enrollment planning. And employee benefits and TELUS Health staff held its initial kickoff meeting in early June to discuss the changes and implementation plan for open enrollment. The formal OE communication plan report is being scheduled for the JLMBC August meeting. Moving on over to the catastrophic illness program ordinance. The city recently approved the proposed ordinance during its June 27th meeting. Updates to the catastrophic illness program communication materials will be conducted once the ordinance is effective, which typically takes about 30 calendar days after adoption. Over on page 2, we have an update on the enhanced enrollment experience projects. Jennifer and the Standard had gone over this, so the only thing I would like to add is that staff has been working with both Standard and TELUS Health on the specification details and process changes needed to implement this program. We are aiming to have it completed sometime in September this year. And lastly, we just have one staffing update. Last month, we hired Karina Aguirre to fill the remaining benefits analyst position. With that hiring, we now only have one remaining vacant position left. Thank you very much. And that concludes this report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and also to add any items to the agenda calendar.
thank you. Any questions or comments on the report? All right. Good, thank you so much. All right. I have a request for additional
It was cool.
Okay, yes.
All right, now, I'm on vacation on the 4th, through the 11th.
Of September?
August, yeah. So if this gets anything between, call it special, it won't be available.
Okay, okay. And there's a 50-50 chance we'll even have this one right now because there's a little bit of complication with that.
I'm sorry.
I think we are going to try to have this as a short meeting. The third.
Okay.
Attempt to have it as a short meeting. There's only like a, well, actually, I don't know. That there's